Okay, in this lecture, I'm going to show you the Code-First workflow in action. So here in Visual Studio, I'm going to create a new console application and call it Code-First Demo. Okay, now, similar to last lecture, we need to install Entity Framework. So, Tools, NuGet Package Manager, and Package Manager Console. Install package Entity Framework. Beautiful. Okay, now back to the program. Now, with Code-First, of course, we start with the code. So I'm not going to go to Management Studio and create a new database. Instead, I'm going to create a new class called Post. So this Post class looks exactly like the one that Entity Framework generated for me as part of Database First workflow. But in this lecture, I created it by hand. Now, in companion to this class, I also need a DB context. Remember DB context? It's an abstraction over the database that we use to load or save data. So, basically, all we have to do here is to create a class that derives from DB context and exposed one or more DB sets. In this case, DB set of post. Next, we need to specify the connection string to the database. So we go to app config. And here, I create the connection strings element and add a new connection string. I'm going to call this the same name as my DB context. So blog DB context. And the actual connection string is in this case, I'm using SQL Express. You might be using a different engine. So you create a connection string that works for you. So initial catalog is the database name, and integrated security means I'm using Windows authentication. Now, one more element we need to add to this connection string, and that is provider name, which should be system.data.sql client. This is required to work with Code-First. Okay, next, I'm going to go to Package Manager Console. We need to enable Code-First migrations. So this is a command that we run only once for the lifetime of a project. So enable migrations. So Code-First migrations enabled for project Code-First demo. Beautiful. Now, out of these few steps I have done so far, installing Entity Framework, adding the connection string, and enabling migrations are steps that we do only once. That's it. Every time we want to make a change in our model, we start with the code. So in this case, for example, we create a new class like post or modify an existing class. The possibilities are endless. Now, every time we make a change to our model, we need to create a migration. So we go to Package Manager Console and use the command add migration. And here we need to specify a name that represents the kind of change we have made. In this example, I created the post class. Let's see what happened. So I go to Solution Explorer. Look, we've got a new folder called Migrations. And inside this folder, we've got two files. The first one is my migration. Note that it has a date timestamp and a description. And this is very similar to the migration script that we created manually last time. Remember, I had to create a change script? This is exactly the same process, but in a more automated fashion. Let's see what's inside this file. So interestingly, we don't have any SQL code here. This is plain C# code. This class, createPost, derives from DB migration, and it has two methods, up and down. So the first one is used to upgrade database, and the second one is used to downgrade database. So with code first migrations, we can take any database and take it to any version, whether that version is higher or lower. And this is very powerful. If you're maintaining different versions of an application, this is going to be your best friend. Now let's see what's happening inside the up method. So there is a call to this method, createTable. It tries to create a table called posts with these columns. So ID, which is an integer, it's not nullable, and its identity. Date published is a date time, and it's not nullable. And we have two more columns, title and body, they both are a string. And finally here, there is a call to primary key method, which specifies that the ID column should be set as primary key. So the interesting thing here is Entity Framework uses convention over configuration. So when it looks at our model, in this case our post class, based on the name and type of our properties, it can figure out how the database should look like. For example, it knows that ID is typically used for the primary key, and often it's an identity column. So it automatically added these expressions here. So we created a code first migration. The next step is to run it. When we run it, Entity Framework looks at the database, detects the current version, which I will show you later, and then figures out what migrations need to run on the database to bring it up to date. Then it gets these migration classes and converts them to SQL code and runs it on the database. So to run the migration, we go back to Package Manager console and run update database. So in this example, it realized that this is the only migration that needs to be run on the database. And of course, it ran it. So let's see the result. I'm going to go back to Management Studio, refresh the databases, and here we have Code First Demo. So I did not have to come here and manually create this database. I just focused on my code, which is much more fun for us developers. So let's expand this. Look, we've got two tables here. Underline migration history, which is used internally by Entity Framework to figure out what migrations have been run on this database. And we also have this posts table with these columns, which looks exactly like the one we created in the database first demo. So as you saw, with the code first workflow, we simply focus on our code and let the Entity Framework take care of generating or migrating the database for us. Every time we want to make a change to the database, again, we start with the code, create a migration, run it, and the database will be updated. So this is the process. In the next lecture, I'm going to give you a comparison of database first and code first.